What's up, everybody? This is Alex from Fireside Giants and Empire Sports Media Production. You're listening to the Fireside Giants podcast. If you are a diehard Giants fan, you've come to the right place. Daily episodes, interviews, draft content, and so much more. Make sure to drop a like and a subscription below on YouTube. And don't forget to leave a comment. We love to engage with everybody. Now, today's episode, we will be discussing the tight end position for the Giants as a whole. We discussed Jeremy Rucker, did a little draft evaluation a couple days ago. We really think he could be a great fit with the Giants. Really great pass catcher. He's a willing blocker, has some pretty solid attributes that he can add to this team right off the bat. And we think that Andy Bischoff, the tight ends coach, could do something really special with him, similar to what he did with Mark Andrews back in Baltimore. But we want to discuss Evan Ingram, Kyle Rudolph, Hayden Smith, the whole unit in conjunction, and really where they're going with it and where we think they should go with it in terms of cap savings. Evan Ingram, should they keep him on a 1 year deal? Let's discuss a couple things here, Anthony, before we dive into it. How you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing really good, and I think that the tight end position is one that's really interesting for the Giants this upcoming season. Of course, we know that the Buffalo Bills offense that Brian Daboll is likely to implement is going to look a lot different than the one that Jason Garrett and Freddie Kitchens were implementing. It's not going to look the same. For one of the main reasons being that Jason Garrett uses a lot of 2 tight end sets, 3 tight end sets. Like, he loves to put tight ends out on the field, but Brian Daboll over in Buffalo rarely did anything like that. It was primarily 1 tight end on the field at all times. They rarely put 2 tight ends on the field, and it was so rare for them to put 3 tight ends on the field. Now, of course, Mike Kafka, offensive coordinator, they ran a little bit more 2 tight end sets over in Kansas City, but I have a feeling that Brian Daboll is going to be the guy who's really implementing the offensive scheme, building the scheme, and Mike Kafka is going to be pulling out of this playbook to call the plays. So I don't expect the Giants to put as much of an emphasis on the tight end position as they have in the past. Of course, they really put an emphasis on it when they went and signed Kyle Rudolph to that contract. They really wanted to have a lot of 2 tight end sets out there. They thought Evan Engram could kind of be like that fire and have Kyle Rudolph be that ice. Of course, it didn't work out that way. And now it looks like likely Evan Engram probably going to be gone. And then you take a look at Kyle Rudolph in the cap situation. He's almost has to be cut at this point because of the salary cap space and the predicament that the Giants have found themselves in. So who's next up? Like, who will the next tight end be for the New York Giants? It's a big question that they have to answer, and I'm excited to see exactly what they do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the tight end position is one of those really interesting ones, right? Because you don't necessarily need a great tight end to be a great team. Look at the Super Bowl. Cincinnati Bengals, Uzoma did not play much of a part. He got injured. And look at the Rams. Tyler Higbee was injured, still in the Super Bowl, made some pushes in the late portions there. And while I kind of want to say that having a great tight end is a luxury, I think that having a good tight end is a necessity. I think they're very different things, right? Travis Kelce, luxury. Mark Andrews, luxury. You don't need those guys to be a competent offense. You need a good tight end who can, offer you a solid body and frame in the short to intermediate portions of the field. Maybe run a streak route every now and then. The problem was with Evan Ingram is that he did not have a strong enough frame. He didn't have good enough hands to be a reliable target in the short to intermediate portions of the field. Now, Evan Ingram was directly correlated to 4 or 5 interceptions for the Giants. I think it was 2 years ago when he had that just wild, inconsistent season. And, because of that, the Giants offense was turning the ball over at ridiculous rates. And a lot of those interceptions came in the short, intermediate portions of the field, right where the sticks were. A lot of those curl routes that Jason Garrett loved to run. With the tight ends going forward, Evan Ingram, in my opinion, is gone. I don't want him back. I think he needs to change the scenery. I think we need to change the scenery when it comes to the tight end position. And mainly because I don't trust him as a blocker and I don't trust him as a receiver, right? If you can't trust your tight end to do either of those things, it's clear that he probably is not a good fit for you. Honestly, he might go to a team where they use 11 personnel or even maybe 12 personnel, but they can use one of those tight ends as a jumbo slot, right? That's where I see Evan Ingram thriving in a jumbo slot role. I don't think necessarily he is going to be a featured tight end on a great team and become this unbelievable player. I think that he will be a competent receiving tight end who will not be used as a blocker predominantly because the Giants kind of took him out of blocking duties last year, really used Kyle Rudolph more as a prominent blocker, and the Giants can save $5 million just by releasing Kyle Rudolph in the first place. So I think that he's gone. Evan Ingram's gone. All that's left over is Hayden Smith. I have always been a Hayden Smith fan. I don't think that he's going to be an elite starter by any means. He was on the San Francisco 49ers. They released him personally. I kind of think that Hayden Smith fits that second tight end spot pretty well. I think that a Jeremy Rucker as the starter and Hayden Smith as the reserve kind of combination would be solid for the Giants. I like those big body, like Kevin Boss, Jake Ballard style tight ends. I want to go back to those. They can receive, but they got those big frames that can haul in those high percentage high percentage targets from the quarterback. That's what I'm looking for. I don't need my tight end to be running seam routes. Why else do you have Kadarius Toney? Why do you have Kenny Galladay? Why do you have Darius Slayton or Sterling Shepard if you're going to use your tight end to run seam routes all the time? Now, when you watch Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce do it, it's like, oh, wow, that's an elite connection. But a lot of that is unscripted. During the postseason when they beat the Bills, that last play to Travis Kelce, he was like, we didn't even call that play. I literally looked at Patrick Mahomes and he knew I was going to be running a streak there. And they just have some unreal chemistry and it just works out so well. But all those great tight ends were also mid-round picks. I just wrote an article and I want to talk about this more, maybe tomorrow, maybe on Saturday or something, Anthony, that the graveyard of third, fourth, and mid-round picks from Dave Gettleman was the factor that set back the Giants tremendously as a foundational team. He failed to lay the foundation. The secret ingredient to building a good team is hitting on players in the mid rounds. It's not your first round picks, because if your strategy is to always be getting first round picks, they're going to cost a shit ton and you're never going to be able to make any progress because you're always relying on those individual 1-2 players to overhaul a team. And we saw with Saquon Barkley wasn't capable of doing it. He ended up getting injured because we tried to rely on him too much. But the tight end position, one of those things, you can hit on a guy in the mid rounds if you have good coaches that can develop a guy, Anthony. How do you think that the Giants go with this? Do you think that maybe free agency could also be a mode of acquisition? I think maybe you don't want to spend too much money there, but is there any names that might interest you?
Yeah, there is. And I do want to touch on the graveyard of mid-round picks, right, for the Giants, because that has crippled them. Not landing any great players, any decent players, solid contributors in those middle rounds. I mean, the ones that they did, it's sparingly that they find good players in those middle rounds. At least it was under the Gettleman era. I mean, that is really important when you're taking a look at the way that the Giants are constructed. There's not a lot of depth. Why? Because they're not hitting on those middle rounds or those middle round picks. Now you take a look at the Buffalo Bills, and what position are we talking about? We're talking about tight end position. I believe Dawson Knox was either a third or a fifth round pick. He was one of those two. He's a middle round pick, exactly what we're talking about. The Giants failing to land middle round picks, but the Buffalo Bills, they land middle round picks. They hit on those. They drafted some really good players in those middle rounds. Dawson Knox is not, he's not elite. He's not like, one of the best tight ends in the NFL, but he's in that upper half, right? That upper echelon of the NFL. He's there and he's really competent. He's a good tight end, and him and Josh Allen have a great connection. And I mean, that was just a great selection by the Bills in the middle round. So you kind of go forward now with Joe Shane coming over from Buffalo, the track history that they had over there, they're much better drafting in those middle rounds. So you have to assume that Joe Shane, his batting average is going to be higher in the middle rounds than it was for Dave Gettleman. Like, you have to assume he's going to find better players in those middle rounds. Hopefully, maybe he can find the tight end, right? Andy Bischoff, he's got to get a good tight end underneath his wing. I got an idea that I'm going to name in just a second. But Jeremy Rucker, we did a film breakdown on him last week. You guys seem to really enjoy that. We got plenty more film breakdowns coming out soon. But that one was really interesting to me because that guy seemed like a perfect fit for the Giants, and he's not a first-round pick. And that's important because I think it's good early on to take a look at these middle round guys that the Giants could land, because that's going to be the difference maker come April. So Jeremy Rucker, I love him as a draft option, but I'm going to throw out a free agency option as well. This is a guy who has a great connection with Andy Bischoff, tight ends coach of the Baltimore Ravens, formerly now with the New York Giants. You're talking about Hayden Hurst, right? Former Baltimore Raven. He was traded over to the Atlanta Falcons. When he was on the Ravens, he was a former first-round pick. He went 25th overall in the 2018 NFL draft. Of course, the Ravens got so lucky that they landed Mark Andrews, and I believe the third round of that year's draft as well. So they double whammied it at the tight end position, and Mark Andrews just happened to be the better prospect and better player in the NFL. But Hayden Hurst was a solid player in his first two seasons for the Baltimore Ravens. And even when he went over to the Falcons, his first year with the Falcons in 2020, he caught 6 touchdown passes. Like, he's not a bad player. He's a solid $2 million 1-year deal. Like, that's all you need to do at the tight end position if you're the New York Giants, in my opinion. You don't want to break the bank. You can't break the bank because you don't have salary cap space. But a guy like Hayden Hurst, I think, makes perfect sense for the Giants if they want to consider some inexpensive options, low budget options in the free agency market. I think that Hayden Hurst makes a lot of sense, has that little Ravens connection, and he's also just a solid average, at least average tight end in the NFL. And I think that's exactly what the Giants need just to get by for 1 year at least.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll cost a hell of a lot less than Kyle Rudolph, too. I'm actually looking at the free agent list for tight ends right now. I've never seen a deeper free agency class for tight ends in my life. This is actually absurd. Like, let me list off some of the guys for you. Zach Ertz, Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski, CJ Ozuma, Eric Ebron, Gerald Everett, Jared Cook, Max Williams, who I actually like, Mo Alley Cox, Robert Tonyan, who actually is kind of underrated too with Green Bay, Anthony Fursker, Lee Smith, OJ Howard, Hayden Hurst, Evan Ingram, David Njoku, Mike Gesicki, Tyler Croft. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's insane. I don't think I've ever. Dalton Schultz is another guy who's unbelievable for the Cowboys this year. He'll probably get a nice little payday. Pretty insane, actually. But like you said, 1 year deal, something low money. I could totally see where you're coming from with the Hayden Hurst connection. 3 touchdowns, 221 yards, I believe, this past season. I think Max Williams also is kind of an underrated guy out of Arizona. Didn't get as much action as I would have hoped for him over with the Cardinals, but I think he's a pretty solid player. And when it comes to the draft, I think those mid-round picks, and I do believe that the Giants will try and solve positions like that through the draft, right? Because they feel confident in their coaching staff now, and you can keep the money down significantly on guys, and they're rebuilding. There's not really like a pressing need to go after one of these guys in free agency because you're not expecting to win now. It's not like you're like, oh, I want to go get Hayden Hurst and like that'll be the difference maker. I think you can get a good tight end, develop him, mold him to fit the system and fit the scheme the Giants are trying to build. And I do like what Brian Daboll has already said about like taking players and extrapolating on their strengths, right? Daniel Jones, whether it's the read zone option, whether it's more RPOs, whether it's the spread offense, getting things more vertical, the offensive line, building to those strengths. Like, what is Andrew Thomas good at? Is he a good wide zone blocker? Is he a good power blocker? Like, what are we going to use him as? Who are we going to draft that's going to fit those strengths? Because ultimately, you have to also draft guys that are going to complement the strengths of the guys on the roster at the same time. Right? If you're looking at Andrew Thomas, I'm not gonna go get a guy who is like ridiculously athletic and fast and speed but lacks power, because Andrew Thomas may not work well next to him. Maybe he needs a guy next to him that has a lot of power. Maybe Daniel Jones needs a tight end that's not super fast and athletic like Evan Ingram. Maybe he needs a tight end who has phenomenal hands like Jeremy Rucker and can block a little bit on the outside. Those are the type of things, like when you have your prime players, you look at your cornerstone players, Daniel Jones, Andrew Thomas on offense, and look at even Kenny Golladay because he's on a massive contract. Who can we get to open those guys up? And when it comes to maybe Kenny Golladay, for example, maybe you want a shiftier receiver like Kadarius Toney, who's going to draw attention from the safeties, who's fast enough to get to the second level and draw safeties out of position so that Kenny Golladay can have man coverage. Or if a safety is going to try and get cover Kenny Golladay over the top, you have Kadarius Toney who's shifty and fast who can get underneath. It's all of those different things that are the interworkings of a team that like kind of go unnoticed, but you have to have complementary players. I think that, you can find that in the draft. A lot of these guys that you're getting from free agency are established, right? They're not moldable that much anymore because they've learned in a scheme. They've been built up a certain way. When you get a guy in the draft, you're literally able to just take that and mold it into whatever you want. I think that's the route the Giants are going to go with a lot of these like positions like tight end, like linebacker, like outside linebacker, specific pass rush moves and stuff like that. So, Anthony, do you think that the draft is more, I guess, valuable in terms of the tight end position this year than going the free agency round, spending a little bit?
I think you could do both personally. I think you can get a low budget tight end in free agency. And then also the Giants have a bunch of middle round picks. Like they have a lot this year. They have 9 picks in total. And if there's compensatory picks, it could even get an extra. If they make any trades, they could get more. If they trade down, they'll definitely get more. Like they have a lot of flexibility with the draft, a lot of picks in those middle rounds. I believe they have two or three third round picks. I think it's 2. And one of those could easily be spent on a tight end, even though you already signed a decent average tight end in free agency. Like you could do both realistically, in my opinion. And I don't think that it would be something to criticize because you go with the tight end in free agency because you need a little stopgap, right? Like you need a guy that can be there to be average. Like that's your foundational, like what he is. He's a solid player in free agency to play tight end this year. But going forward, do you really want this guy to be the future at that position? Maybe not. So you can also take a chance on a middle round tight end. And if he happens to pan out and be a Mark Andrews, a George Kittle, these are all middle round picks. Second round pick, Travis Kelce, Dawson Knox, another middle round pick. A lot of these best tight ends in the NFL were mid round picks. If you happen to land one of those, that's amazing. That's awesome. That's your future at the tight end position right there. But if not, you've got a solid rotational rookie that can develop and become a decent player one day. And you have a nice veteran that you signed in free agency, like a what's his name? Like Max Williams, like you mentioned. Like there's plenty of tight ends out there. You listed a whole bunch. Njoku, OJ Howard. There's so much talent out there on the free agent market. And big thing with that as well is when there's so much talent, the price tags drop because there's just so many options, right? So they're going to be even cheaper than they should be. So you can definitely get a really solid tight end for the low this year in free agency. And I definitely think that's the route that the Giants are going to go. And again, I think that the connection between Hayden Hurst and Andy Bischoff makes too much sense to me. I mean, his best years were in Baltimore. You take a look at the stats and his efficiency ratings. Like he was good when he was with the Baltimore Ravens and Andy Bischoff was coaching him. So I think it makes a lot of sense. Andy Bischoff might say, hey, this kid, he had a lot of talent when I used to coach him over in Baltimore. I think that I can get him back to that level if we sign him over here in New York. And I think that would be perfect for the Giants.
Yeah, that's a very, very valid, it's a really valid opinion. I think, there's so many tight ends on the free agency market. There's definitely going to be there's so many, like it's going to drive the cost down. It's just like just demand. If there's too much demand, the price goes down. If there's not enough demand, it goes up. Or rather the opposite. So it's kind of interesting you make that point. I was like, I'm saying that totally wrong. But you get the point. But looking at this, I still think that maybe drafting a guy could be beneficial. Even if they were to go get Hayden Hurst, on a 1-year deal, draft Jeremy Rucker too. You have 2 or 3 round picks. He's a good player. You can develop him, learns behind a veteran, get some experience, and he can get some reps too. I think that's a beneficial move for the Giants, nonetheless. But I think that's pretty much wraps up our tight end conversation. I think we're both in the consensus that Evan Ingram's gone. Kyle Rudolph's got to be cut. That's a Dave Gettleman move, Joe Judge move. He's gone. I think it's time for some fresh blood. Let them make some decisions. I mean, Dawson Knox, I think you said before, 3rd round pick. So we know that they love to go with those tight ends in the mid rounds. I believe they will do something similar this year. And we'll take a look at some more guys. I know that Jake Ferguson's a guy that stood out to a lot of people. There's another guy. There's another one from Colorado, I believe, that people really, really liked. I forget what his name is. Kaplan, maybe? I don't remember, but he looked awesome too. He was a sick receiver. I was watching some film on him. And he was an awesome receiver, and he made some really big explosive plays downfield, which, is great and all, but it doesn't matter if you're going downfield to their tight end if your offensive line can't block, as we've seen over the past couple of years at Daniel Jones and Evan Ingram. We need a guy with good hands in the short to intermediate range and can really help in that area. I think personally Jeremy Rucker is that guy, but there's a ton of good options we'll take a look at nonetheless. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Fireside Giants. Make sure to like and subscribe as always. Much love, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
So